Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm Aya Soma, and I'm here with our special guest, Aya Sudina, here to my left, and Bhante Sanata Vihari to my right. And last but not least, and also very special, but he's not a guest, resident Bhante Sudaso, all the way to the end, to the left of Aya Sudina. So welcome to Monk Chat. For those of you who are new, you're welcome to type in any questions you might have on Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and we'll try our best to answer them. You can also request the monastic to answer your particular question, and I see that Geeta has already done that. So without further ado, we can start with our monk chat. So Geeta asks, question for both Aya Sudina and Bhante Sanata Vihari. Why did you ordain, and what life event drew you to Buddhism? So pass it on to our
Say it again, please.
Why did you ordain, and what brought you to Buddhism?
Yeah, you
can.
For generations, we have been Buddhists. So, therefore, there was, it was part of our life, the Buddhism. It was nothing that that was sort of different, because it's part of our life, especially in Sri Lanka. So, but now the question is, why did you ordain, right? So, I must say that I did not have that kind of wish to ordain as such, because I led just an ordinary life. And it's a little difficult to sort of pinpoint and say, this is why I ordain, because my life right through has not been very, very difficult. I was born into a family, middle-class family, and my life was, just ordinary. We had everything that we wanted, not luxuriously, but, middle-class family. So later on, of course, I got married and had children and all that. So, and then I think it was just meeting Bhante Gunaratana of West Virginia, that made me think about ordination. I felt, I don't know why it was so, I felt that I had to take my precepts from him. And that's how it happened. So I got my precepts from him, and he is my guru. And even today, if there is a problem, I always ask him. So that's how it is.
Thank you, Venerable. And Bhante Sanata Vihari?
I think that the first time I came into Buddhism, what I learned about Buddhism was in high school. A couple of things. I lived in my school was like in Thai town, and there was a lot of Thai people. And then my high school girlfriend was Buddhist, and then I also read a book by So I read this book called The Joy of Living, Dying in Peace, and I was like, living with joy, yes, dying with joy. And I was like, I don't get it. That seems scary. How could you die joyfully? But when I finished reading the book, I was like, yes, I love Buddhism. I want to be Buddhist. But I was, a teenager in high school, in Hollywood High School. That's not going to happen. So then I was thinking about what I'm going to do. Like when I was about 19 years old, I was about to be 20, what I was going to do. And I always thought about going to the military. So I had that in mind, but at the same time, I wanted to try to do something else. So I went to Wat Thai, Los Angeles to try to learn about Buddhism. But unfortunately, like there was no one there both times that I went that could speak English. They just gave me a book. So then I was like, well, I'm just going to continue with my plans in the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force, and then when I was around 26, I found Ajahn Brahmavanzo online, and then I was just watching him like every day, every day. And those were like the poor quality videos. Like, it was back in the days, and it was like, and there wasn't that many. So I just keep watching the same ones over and over and over. It's all pixelated. But he was so funny, and it made a lot of sense. And then after that, I started looking for temples, and lo and behold, across the street, there was a Sri Lankan temple, but it just looks like a house, so you can't tell that it's a temple. So I went there, and I wasn't really into it. But then one day, a couple months after being there was this monk named Bhante Punaji, and he gave a talk. And the first time it didn't make sense, and then he kept giving a series of talks. The second time it made a lot of sense, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to try practicing this. So for the next year I practiced, but then I got deployed again, so I went to Afghanistan, and then I decided to practice there. And I'm like, if it works here, then it can work anywhere. And I did. So like every day I was like practicing meditation. I was learning I was going like every day a different Dhammapada verse, and also trying to read suttas. It was very difficult at that time because it's so repetitive. It gets boring like after 5 minutes. And then once I came back, I went on a couple meditation retreats with different Buddhist traditions. And then I kind of knew that I wanted to become a monk. So, but first I asked for precepts. I asked the monks, I want to become a Buddhist. They're like, well, you're already a Buddhist. I'm like, no, like make me a Buddhist. They're like, we can't make you a Buddhist. And I said, can you do a ceremony for me, please? And they're like, well, there's an 8 precept program. If you want to, we can give you the 5 precepts there, and then you can call yourself a Buddhist. And I was like, okay, it makes me feel better. It feels official. But they told me like, it's all up to you. Like there's nothing, we can't make you Buddhist. There's no ceremony. So then I did that, and then I wanted to become a monk also. So I told them, and I had to wait like a year before they accepted me. And then I became a monk, and now I'm here. And I also, like I said, I can't pick like one thing besides me being like disenchanted with all the fun I was having in my life. So like I said, like I can't think of any bad things. I was kind of like from a working class family, and I had a lot of good times, and I was so lucky, and I had the best friends, and I had like traveled the world, partying everywhere, and I don't really have anything to complain about. I achieved everything that I wanted to pretty much achieve, but I just found like there was still something missing, and the Dhamma was the best thing that I could find. So then I just dedicated myself to Dhamma, and that's it.
Sadhu.
Wonderful. Thank you, Venerable, for sharing. And Suzanne, good to see you, Suzanne. Hopefully we'll also see you in person. Actually, since you live not too far away, you should come this weekend to meet the Venerables in person, as well as see us too in person again. So Suzanne says, hello, Sangha, much metta to you as well. My question to the Venerables is, does it feel weird when people bow to you and prostrate themselves? So I'll answer, yes, absolutely. It feels weird when people bow to me and prostrate themselves to me, but not when they bow and prostrate to the Sangha. So it's really always like the problem is when we get into the the way. So, and at the very beginning, actually, I was struggling a lot, both before ordination at the idea that I was going to be part of that, parameter, and actually as soon as I ordained. And that is, once again, wrong view, and attachment to ourselves and suffering, ultimately, and a lack of understanding of why we have robes and why there is this relationship amongst monastics and lay people. But when you actually spend a lot of time with people who are born Buddhist, then you also start understanding and seeing how they relate to the Sangha. And if they don't relate to individuals per se, in terms of respect, but rather to the triple gem. That's why it's called the triple gem. And one of the gems is the Sangha. And when we wear this robe, that's the reason why we all look the same. We all have the same haircut. It's actually that we are representing the triple gem, and that is worthy of respect, not the individual, the single individual. So that is the practice that we also have to understand, that also when we go about with these robes, as monastics, we're not anymore individuals, but we are representing something sacred. It's huge responsibility, actually. Much easier just to have one own responsibility instead of, you make bad action and then you're like, okay, well, Soma made that bad action. No, now it's the Sangha by the means of Ayasoma has made a bad action. And that is incredibly worse karma than if it were, just, before as a lay person. So hope that answers your question, and maybe the Venerables have different perspectives.
Start over there.
Similarly, in the beginning, it felt strange to me. But as time goes by, you get used to it. And the thing which made a really big difference for me was, similarly to what Ayasoma was saying, when somebody is bowing in my direction, what I think of is, it's so beautiful that this person respects the Sangha. It's so beautiful that this person values the Dhamma well enough to value people who commit themselves to the Dhamma. It's so beautiful that this person honors the Buddha enough to honor those who follow in the Buddha's footsteps. So when someone's bowing to me, I'm usually smiling, and I'm not smiling because they're bowing to me. I'm smiling because I'm appreciating their good qualities. I'm thinking about what incredibly wholesome qualities somebody has in order to bow to a monk. And I'm appreciating those wholesome qualities. So that took all the discomfort out of it. That made it, then when people bow in my direction, I feel a lot of joy because that person is demonstrating their goodness.
I feel very humiliated, sort of not humiliated. I feel humble, very, very humble. And when people bow to me, I think I must make myself worthy of this bow. And that people are bowing to me because of something that they see in me. So I have to keep up to that, and I try my best to make myself a little better than yesterday.
Well, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to bow to you multiple times a day, Ayasadina. She's here at Empty Cloud for the week. So we have this meritorious opportunity to pay respect here at Empty Cloud. And Gita says, do you try to find ways to help your family to understand the teachings of the Dhamma, and how? Anyone wants to volunteer?
I'll volunteer because people asked me this as soon as I became a monk. They're like, oh, so now your whole family's going to become Buddhist. And I was like, no, I don't want them to be here. First off, I like them, but it's easier to like people at a distance. Right? Like nephews. That's why we all love our nephews so much, because we don't have to live with them. Like they're our siblings' kids, and we can always return them. So no, I haven't really taught any direct Dhamma to any of my family members, or ever had any idea of even making them Buddhists at all. Like, they can live their lives, I'm gonna live my life. I have no interest in it. But I think just me being me, who I am, obviously influences them. So they kind of like learn vicariously the Dhamma. So through example, I've seen sometimes they've changed things, or the way they say things has changed. So indirect, like transmission.
Yes, I will second that, Bhante. Actually, my parents, well, they're not interested in understanding the teachings, let alone even like actually reading them, so it's or listening to them. So understanding is a step way ahead of what they're currently at. And so they're very sensitive to, or my mom is very street smart. So actually, if I try to say anything that is Dhamma related, she'll go like, ah, you're trying to do that Buddhist thing. I am not interested in that stuff. Shut up. But the Buddha also says that the only way we can repay our parents is to teach them the Dhamma. So then I'm always like, how do I repay my parents? You know, the Buddhist guilt instead of the Catholic guilt. So as actually Bhante said, sometimes the most effective, actually not sometimes, pretty much I would say all the time, is to lead by example. So instead of preaching the Dhamma, practicing what we preach. And so, for example, not getting irritated when our parents say something, or breaking the cycle of the kind of unhealthy habits that we have with our family. Like really applying the Dhamma, applying the teachings, then that is actually a way that I would say is not necessary. It's indirect in terms of speech, but it's actually the most direct way to influence people who might not be interested in theory to the teachings, and especially the family, if they're not born. They don't have the good karma of Ayasudin of being born Buddhist and having that natural inclination towards the triple gem.
In my case, it was, yes, as you said, it was different. But when I first ordained as a Samaneri, there were people who just looked, what is this one, what has she done? In fact, with my head shaved and, wearing this kind of robe, they sort of looked down on me like, as if I had done something wrong. So, but as the years went by, the impact of my ordination was felt. And most of them also, those who did not sort of, that is one of the drawbacks in the Sri Lankan society, that they think that because they are all born Buddhist, that is it, they have everything because they are born Buddhist. They don't have to practice. So that is the kind of attitude that usually our Sri Lankan people have. So even my people too, I think, was like that. They gave dana, they do all those rituals and all those things they did, but the real practice was not done. But from what I did, I think they have turned towards the practice more now. So therefore, I'm glad in a way that I was able to influence them at least to a slight degree.
Thank you, Venerable. Bhante Sudatta, you're the only one missing on the...
I'll pass on this one.
All right. Mary, good to see you, our neighbor. I hope you enjoy the gifts. Oh. We'll keep an eye out, and I'm sure we'll enjoy them. Thank you for being so thoughtful. And if you're around this weekend, we'd love to see you. And good opportunity to meet Ayasudina before she leaves. Good to see you, Aaron and Rick. Rick says, the last 10 years, I have felt driven to recreate the life I lost due to many changing conditions. Worsening illness, loss of career, divorce, deaths in the family, economic collapse of 2008, and more. How do I get free from this craving? Bhante Sudatta?
Well, first off, recognize that it's absolutely futile. It's impossible to recreate the past. That's why it's called past. Like, it's past, it's gone. We aren't experiencing it anymore. So it's futile. There's absolutely no point in trying to recreate the past. Also, ask yourself, why do I want to recreate the past? And you'll probably come up with some answer like, because I believe I was happier in the past. So then the real answer is you want to be happy, yeah? And you think that recreating your past will make you happy. But actually, if you reflect a bit more, you'll probably realize that you weren't happy then either. You might have this delusion about happiness in the past, but it's actually just delusion. Nostalgia is a very peculiar thing. So I recommend looking more closely at nostalgia. And you'll realize that nostalgia is craving for an imagined past. Nostalgia is not craving for any actual experience we've ever had. It's craving for an idealized version of the past. When you reflect on the actual past, you'll remember that it actually kind of sucked. You don't really want to go back to the past because it actually wasn't that great. In our memory, we rewrite our memories to try to make the past a more exaggerated version of itself. So the good things we pretend were amazing. The bad things we pretend were terrible. But actually the past was not really much different from the present. A pretty mediocre mixture of moderately good and moderately bad. So why would you want to go from the mediocre present to the mediocre past? Seems pretty silly. Rather, we should ask ourselves, what conditions can I create in my life that will help me attain the highest happiness? How can I work on developing an unshakable serenity of mind? How can I work on developing a mind which would be happy under any conditions? Whether the conditions I have in the present or the conditions I had in the past, or any conditions that might come up in the future. How can I train my mind to be immune to shifting conditions? Because there might be more economic collapses. There will definitely be more loss of relatives and friends. That's inevitable. There will be shifting and changing fortunes. That's just life. So the real question you should ask yourself is, how can I practice equanimity? How can I practice contentment? So that I am unaffected by things like economic collapse and loss of loved ones and so on. So yeah, don't waste your time trying to recreate the past. Just focus on training your mind in the wholesome qualities of mindfulness, equanimity, contentment, compassion, wisdom. This is what actually is what will bring you true satisfaction.
Thank you, Bhante. And Dave says, hello, Bhante. The word happiness can mean both contentment and sensual gratification. Do you think happiness is an appropriate word to describe the result of Dharma practice? Since actually, I think we had a bit of a discussion this morning between Aya Sudina and Bhante Sudasa. I'll pass it on to Bhante Sanata Vihari, who might have something else to contribute.
I feel like in English, we're very sloppy with our words, like happiness and love. Like, I love a cheeseburger. I love my girlfriend, and I love my mother. You shouldn't love those things the same way. They should be different, right? Hopefully.
Wow, it cracked up at Bhante Sudasa, one of his very rare moments.
One a day, right? Every day I'm getting one, so
yes.
You'll be tomorrow. So I think happiness is like that too, right? Happiness is we're very sloppy with these things in English. I think it's done on purpose, maybe like to sell us things, right? So that you just put happiness and love on everything, people will buy it and take it. So I would say from a dharmic perspective, happiness comes from wholesomeness, from like tranquility and calmness. So pleasure is not happiness at all. Pleasure might give you some relief, and you're confusing that relief that came from the pleasure with happiness. Right? But that's not happiness, at least not the dharmic happiness. So yeah, people say, this made me happy, that made me happy. But the only happiness, I think the Buddha, I forget which sutta the Buddha said this, but he says the only happiness or the only answer that regular people know for pain or for suffering is sensual pleasures. That's like the only thing they try to find refuge in, but they're misguided in doing that. So according to the Buddha, the real happiness would be like nibbana, That's the only real happiness, the true happiness, the highest happiness. And sensual pleasures just appear to be happiness, but they're really not.
Thank you, Bhante. Actually, to quote Aya Sudina from yesterday's, I think, Dhamma talk, that Venerable said something along the lines that we pursue happiness through sensual pleasures. That's why it's impermanent. I wrote it down because I really liked it. It's very, very helpful. And good to see you, Jayanta. Thank you for all the gifts that we received today. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And welcome to Kim, Ginny, Gorgel, Cole, Shanti. Wow, Shanti is watching from Melbourne, currently in lockdown. Hope. Oh, also Paul is watching from Australia. Hope you're all safe. And Pangang, good to see you, Venerable. And great, Suzanne is coming this weekend. Wonderful. Hello, Brian. Okay, there's lots of people. Well, even if I don't say your name, hello. And Brian asks, what is your opinion on making up our own chants? Like chanting, I can be enlightened, in a way to drill a positive possibility for our lives, especially when discouraged. Drill a positive possibility into our minds. Ayasudina?
The word chant gives me a little bit of shock because we don't change the chants as such. But when it comes to loving kindness, practicing loving kindness, we can put in our own choices, whatever we want, like, may I be free from anger, may I be free from whatever, may I get whatever I want, you can add anything like that. But as far as the chants are concerned, the Pali chants are perfect in themselves. Why do we want to add anything? So I don't think that it is necessary. But in wishing for certain things to happen, when we do the loving kindness meditation, we could, of course, add in that way.
I would just add to that so reminding yourself of your own capacity for enlightenment is actually an important part of practice if you doubt that. So there actually I've met a lot of people over the years who they have this idea that other people can attain enlightenment but not themselves. And that's actually an amazingly self-centered and delusional attitude. It's pretending that you are special in some way, special in a negative way, but still it's a very self-centered attitude to think that we are somehow special and unique and being some unique subclass of humans which are incapable of attaining awakening. But actually the Buddhist teachings are incredibly clear that everyone can attain awakening. Every one of us has that capacity. So actually I think it's very useful to remind yourself, I have the ability to attain enlightenment, just like everybody else. And also when you're engaging in any kind of Buddhist practice, whether it's generosity or morality or meditation or sutta study or chanting or anything Buddhist, then you can also remind yourself, I am doing the same practices that every enlightened being did in order to attain enlightenment. I am following exactly the same path. I am following the path that leads towards enlightenment. You can remind yourself, I am on the path which inevitably results in enlightenment. So yeah, you can tell yourself, as long as I continue practicing the Buddha's teachings, then I will certainly attain enlightenment. Definitely, without question. As long as we stay on the path of the Buddha's teachings, we will absolutely, definitely, certainly attain enlightenment. No doubt about it. So reminding yourself of this is actually very important because it's building up what in the Mahayana tradition, what they call bodhicitta, which is the aspiration for awakening, the mind which is intent upon attaining awakening. And that's very important because it drives our motivation for practice. It makes us very enthusiastic about Dhamma practice. So I think it's very good to remind yourself that you can be enlightened. And remind yourself that the Buddhist practices that you're doing are what will produce the conditions for enlightenment to happen.
Thank you, Bante. But I would say, but as an add-on, don't change the chanting. Aya was mentioning, it's very important actually to also really surrender ourselves to the tradition. I found it very helpful in practice. When we're not born Buddhist, we can have all sorts of actually karmic obstructions, ideas of this could be better, or this could be, I don't see the purpose of it, etc. And then we start modifying and trying to reinvent the wheel when we actually inherited a perfect wheel. All we need to do is just spin it, turn it actually. See, I was reinventing the wheel again with the words. Yeah, just turning the wheel of Dhamma, that's all we need to do. And there are so many it's already like built in. It's just offered to us. We can waste so much time trying to create a better version, which is not a better version.
That's a really good point. You need to thoroughly, deeply, intimately understand something before you can make modifications that will at least not harm it. And to be able to actually improve something, you need to have an incredibly refined understanding of it. So it's kind of like somebody who doesn't really understand how car engines work, who decides they want to improve their car engine, start digging around and they're like, oh, spark plug, don't really need that. That looks like junk. Cylinders, well, who needs cylinders? We'll just fill it up with glue. And they wind up with something that very quickly it doesn't function at all. So not only is it not improved, it's actually damaged or even non-functional. Only somebody who has a deep, intimate, thorough understanding of car engines can actually improve an engine. And even then, you have to know exactly what you're doing. So yeah, I agree with Ayasoma. It's important not to start tinkering with traditional Buddhism until you've been practicing it for a very, very long time and have a very thorough understanding of why those components are there and why they are structured the way they are.
And even then, just don't.
Well, by then you should understand that there's nothing that needs to be tinkered with.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And Dane, or Dain, sorry if I mispronounce your name, asks, what if they didn't have wholesomeness and bowed? So I think that you're following up on the question on bowing to monastics. So, yeah, no, it's great. If someone doesn't have wholesome, like is not a wholesome person, great that they're bowing to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, because they're actually creating conditions for wholesomeness to appear in the mind. So let's remember, as Bante said, actually earlier, that, there's there's not that, like each one of us has the possibility of attaining awakening. This applies to like literally every single being, even with the most unwholesome sort of mental conditions. In the suttas, of course, Angulimala is the arahat, like he attained awakening, like full awakening, not just some level of awakening, full awakening, someone who was a serial killer. So that possibility is in us. It depends on our actions. And we should encourage, whenever we see people who are making unwholesome deeds, we should encourage them to align themselves in the Dhamma. It's not that the Buddha, for example, when he encountered Angulimala, knowing that he had killed so many different people, he was like, all right, you're doomed. Like, good luck. Maybe in, million eons. No. He actually, well, of course, he was a Sammasambuddha, so he knew exactly what he could say or what was the appropriate response in that circumstance to help Angulimala. And most often than not, we are not as skillful as the Buddha, so perhaps we're a little bit hit and miss, even when someone is not Angulimala, in terms of a serial killer, just like the average person. But in any case, yeah, like absolutely encourage people to associate with the wise, to have the aspiration for supreme happiness. Because in that way, if one changes their intention, shifts it from harming to non-harming, it's incredible. It's so much benefit for themselves and others at large. So yeah, absolutely. We get ourselves outside of the equation and just really hold dear the triple gem. So this is my thought on it. And Nico asks, do you like Overwatch League? I don't understand what that means.
Game.
It's a
Computer
game.
game.
Sorry, the wrong crowd.
It's also it's violent entertainment.
Violent entertainment. So clearly we don't like it as a definition, but we wouldn't even
And
watch
I've
it.
never even heard of it, so I don't even know what they're talking about.
Yeah. And then Varuna asks, what did the Buddha say about loans, and is it appropriate as a form of dana or generosity? Maybe Bhaktisanata Vihari?
Loans. Well, I know that you can't be in debt to be a monk, so you got to get out of debt, and stuff like that. So I think, does it mean like taking a loan in order to provide dana?
No, I think they mean giving a loan. So like loaning money to somebody or loaning money to either to a person or to a temple.
Oh.
So I would actually say that that is dana, because you're giving somebody time. And yeah, giving somebody a loan can allow them to do things that they otherwise would not be able to do. And then they'll repay you later on, hopefully, but maybe they won't. And also maybe later on you'll decide that you don't want them to repay you. But at a bare minimum, you're giving somebody an opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have. So yeah, I would definitely say that giving a loan is a form of generosity. Yeah.
I had also understood it in the way that Bhaktisanata Vihari had understood it. So maybe we can give both options. Maybe
Okay.
What about taking a loan? And you might be right, but like in case we can have both answers so that all doubt shall be dispelled on the subject matter.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk.
No. I'll pass it on.
Maybe we can read it again, since we're...
What did the Buddha say about loans, and is it appropriate as a form of dana or generosity?
So what did the Buddha say about loans? I'm trying to think in the Sigalovada Sutta or Sigalaka Sutta if there's anything in there about loans, but I can't. Doesn't come, and nothing comes to mind. I mean, that would be the place to look for it. The Buddha does say how we should arrange our affairs, like divide our money into 4 different ways, and save a quarter of it and use half of it for like what your regular business, and then another quarter for like whatever kind of things that you want to use. I can't really think of anything. I can't. I don't remember anything from the suttas about.
No, when he
loans.
talks about friends, then I think Buddha has said that if there is a friend who is in need and you want to help, then it might be a loan too. You see, in case now there is a friend, your friend, who is in need of some money, and he hasn't money, he or she, and you have, and you give it at that time. That will be a very good opportunity to practice generosity, and at the same time to help that friend in need.
Great. Thank you so much, Aya, and to all the venerables, all 3, for answering the question. And Dave says, is there a violence or a violence of a worldly concern that was/is the hardest for you to let go of? Aya Sudina?
I didn't understand the question.
I think like violence, worldly concern, perhaps wars, or like things that are happening in the world that are difficult to let go of. Either that's something that happened in the past that is not your experience anymore, or these days, maybe if you hear bad news or things that are happening in particular countries or this country, or
You mean just ignore it and let go of it? Is that what it means?
I think maybe Bhante Sudaso, can you rephrase it?
I don't understand the question, so I can't even hope to
it was the
rephrase
same
it.
to me, yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll try and answer it how I understand it, and then the venerables can. So I'll repeat the answer, is the question. Is there a violence or worldly concern that is the hardest for you to let go of? So I take this question, when I read it, actually what first came to mind was at the very beginning of my practice. So I have family that comes from this place in Italy that has generational oppression and from the government, etc. And people are have significantly high rates of cancer there, higher, probably one of the highest in the whole world, actually, because yeah, anyway, the mafia and a lot of different problems and issues. And up until Buddhist practice, it was very difficult for me to even read the news, let alone like think about it. It would fill my mind full of dukkha. And actually still, like right now, even now that I'm talking about it, I'm not like 100% comfortable. But I'm able to not cry right now. I'm like doing all right, and why not? So there's progress. So what has happened in the mind? Fundamentally, first of all, understanding that also the reason why I feel so strongly about that issue and not perhaps, issues in other countries, it's because it's closer to my identity, my sense of self. And so when it comes to events or other, similar parameters of oppression that are happening to other different people, I can empathize, but I can also understand better. Like there's more separation and there's more there's more distance, but there's also more closeness in terms of upekkha, so in terms of understanding the nature of things, understanding greed, hatred, and delusion, and how doesn't matter what culture, doesn't matter what nation, it doesn't matter what types of groups of people, gender, etc. However we define it, there's always greed, hatred, and delusion throughout. It's just part of samsara. But obviously, the closer it gets to my identity, the people I care about, where I have lived, the more like sort of that discomfort comes in. And it's difficult, but that is actually an opportunity to see the First Noble Truth of suffering, to really understand what suffering is and to understand how to dispel it. And that there is a way out of suffering. This is always the beautiful news that the Buddha gives us. And most importantly, giving us practical ways to get out of suffering. So, 6 years ago, I would have cried. Would have that solved anything in Italy? Would that problem have disappeared? Absolutely not. I would have just wasted a day of suffering. But these days, actually, there is more time and mind space and also physical space to actually be capable of, perhaps also helping others not oppress other people, so to speak. And actually for myself as well, to create conditions in my mind not to also do that in my immediate. So we think that everybody else is the problem, but we're like saints. If only all those other people weren't acting out of greed, hatred, and delusion, as we're acting out of greed, hatred, and delusion in every single moment. So the two are not terribly separate. So I was taking it as this, I guess, long story long. There are certain things that are close to the heart, close to who we are.
Listening to you, I thought of something that I might add to it. That is, now that I do every day, I think, because there is a lot of violence in the world. And of course, when it comes to closer to you, like Sri Lanka, and I'm having a lot of trouble, one thing that can be done is, of course, we could help in certain ways, like, giving whatever we could. But at the same time, one other thing that we could do is, being so far away from the place where you want to help, to send loving kindness, to do metta meditation for them, for the country, not for the whole world, of course, ultimately. And that is one thing that I remembered when I listened to you.
Thank you, Aya. Yes, that's very important, because once again, we see suffering and then we're like, oh, let me add another layer of suffering to it. That's intelligent. Instead, actually, by producing loving kindness, we are reducing the bar of suffering in the world. So we see already how many blessings that can be accrued with practice. And do the Venerables have anything that comes to mind? Anything to share?
I think there's two topics that, bring out the Holy Roman Inquisitor in me. One of them is like misbehavior. We're talking about teachers, like in the Buddhist Sangha or any misbehavior in the Sangha. When I see something like that online, I usually have to like close the window, put it to the side for a minute, because like it gets me upset, and I think about like, oh, what can I do to like stop this in the future? And, I wish I could be like there's this, I forget where it's from, but sometime after the time of the Buddha, maybe 100 or 200 years, there was actually like groups of monks that would go around disrobing other monks all over India. They were misbehaving, and monks used to hide in the forest so those monks wouldn't find them. They were disrobing them for misbehavior. So that's what I would feel like doing. I'm like, oh, like I could just go around and just pull their robes off and send them out, like that. You don't deserve this. That gets me really upset. I guess I get really, really upset. So I just like put it to the side and then try to come back to it later when I feel better. And the other one is like one of the reasons why I got into studying psychology is that people who are like victims of like sexual abuse, that one's really, when I see something like that, then that really like gets me upset and disgusted at the same time. So those are like probably like the two issues, like, misbehaving in the Sangha and, like sexual abuse of people.
Thank you, Bhante, for being so honest. And Bhante Sudasan?
I'm going to abstain from this question.
All right. And Aaron asks, oh, good to see you, Putrika. That's not what Aaron asked, but Aaron says, do you believe a computer program could be complex enough to qualify as a sentient being according to the Dhamma? Bhante Sudasan?
I think that with the kind of computer technology that we currently have, no. However, it is theoretically possible that someone could come up with a new kind of computer technology that could be a suitable basis for a sentient being to be reborn in that body. So I think it's something which could theoretically happen, but not with the technology that we're currently using. And it would have to be a completely new form of technology, like not anything remotely like the digital computers that we use these days.
Interesting. I feel a little bit skeptical, but
Skepticism is fine on this one.
But I'm not very naturally faithful, so there might be that. Do you have any thoughts?
I agree with Bhante.
Interesting. What are your thoughts, Aya?
I don't have any.
Great. Okay.
So the vote is 2-1 with one abstention. Also, Christy was nodding, so that counts as half a vote.
I am not convinced.
Yeah, but it's 2.5-1 on this one.
Still not convinced. Rick says, as a layperson, when is debt skillful, such as buying a home, and at what point is having too much debt unskillful? Does acquiring too much debt break the precepts? The craving to buy more than I can afford feels like stealing from myself. Okay, interesting. Anybody wants to volunteer on the debt question? All right, Bhante Sanatha Vihari. I'll volunteer you.
So I think we all have to like live within our means. Sometimes I get people at the temple ask me like, should I get that job? Because a lot of people, Sinhalese people are very successful in the United States, and they're always, like, should I go to Silicon Valley and take that job, or should I go to that hospital and take that job? And and then when they get it, they're like, well, should I buy this? Should I get this kind of house? Should I do that? And I always try to tell them, like, Buddhism has nothing against living a good life and living comfortably, as long as you earn the money the right way and as long as you're living within your means. So, the Buddha was friends with most of the rich people at that time. There's a good argument to be made that, the Dhamma was able to be spread because of all the merchants during that time. And the Buddha was close friends with all the kings, all the rich people at that time too. And the Buddha never, told them like, hey, you should just, give all your money to everyone, although he did say to share the food with everyone and the things like that. But I don't see in the suttas anytime the Buddha like trying to guilt trip people on the things that they have or telling them not to get things. It's more about how you got it, how you're using it, and stuff like that. So being skillful and knowing your limits and not living in excess. So I think, if a person's, making $20,000, $30,000 a year, maybe having the newest iPhone is not the best idea. But if you're making like $80,000 or more, having a new iPhone is not a big deal for you. So you have to, know where you're at and make reasonable decisions and don't go beyond your means.
Okay, thank you, Venerable. And Eric asks, are monastics traditionally allowed to use technology or working with technology for the Sangha, such as coding a website or programming software? Well, I mean, technology, the definition is gets updated all the time. So back in the time of the Buddha, the technology was the oral tradition. Then it developed into the writing tradition. And these days there is the coding tradition. So for example, Bhante Sujata, who is a good friend of ours, a very senior monk in Australia, he started Sutta Central. .net. You should all go there. There's the entire Pali Canon translated. And I am so happy that it exists. It's an incredible resource for the entire world. Like, I think it's actually the first time in the past 2,500 years that at a click, like in a second, you can have access to the whole sort of body of teachings. So yes, the Buddha was a very practical, practical being, like enlightened being. So we don't have like weird, odd precepts just for the sake of doing some weird rites and ritual. When we perceive rites and ritual in that way, it's actually our defilements. It's not embedded in the practice. Actually, even my experience in connected to the, I think someone was asking a question earlier. Anyway, like my experience in going in different temples of different traditions. At the very beginning, sometimes a few things I would associate them to just rites and rituals and relate to them as unnecessary, but I was actually reading them through the lenses of Catholicism, which was the religion that I was used to back home. But actually, those all those rituals in Buddhism are very full of Dhamma, very skillful. And I keep learning actually so many meanings to them. We have Champika here, like so good to have you here, Champika. And through her, for example, actually, I learned recently really what the importance and the meaning of offering, say, food to the Buddha is. So we can perceive it as something, go to the temple and we're like, okay, they're doing this really weird thing of putting some food in front of a statue that, it's clearly not a sentient being. And that food is going to go to waste. The practical mind can also go there like, oh, well, food waste, as if we need food waste, etc. So usually, actually, I think in 99.9% of convert Buddhist monasteries, that practice is the first one that goes. And Champika, who's born in Sri Lanka, actually, I was so happy that you brought it up. She was like, why are you not doing this here? That's so weird. I'm not used to not you eat before offering it to the Buddha. That's crazy. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And we had a beautiful conversation where you understand that that offering is not just some ritual that is meaningless, but rather it's where is your first thought in the mind coming? It's a practice of generosity, for example, and a practice of cultivating what is the foremost. We're talking about the triple gem is the foremost, the most precious that we have in the mind. So when we see food, usually what we think is like, I like that, I don't like that, wait, I wanted more of that. Oh, Bhaktisiddhanta Vihari took the last cookie. Damn, I'm like last in line. Instead, our first thought should be like, oh, look at that cookie. Actually, I'll offer it to the foremost, to the Sangha. It's really beautiful. So you see that whenever we don't understand things or we think that they're trivial, it's a defilement of our mind. It's not in the practice. I find it very beautiful, fascinating. Also bowing. The first year of my practice, I was refusing to bow. I was just like, I'm not doing that thing. Like bowing to a statue is really bizarre. Or even maybe, that monk I like, but the other monk I don't like. That one has good, speaks well, but the other one, I saw him, like he's not really, that good of a monk, or almost like unwholesome thoughts of mine. Maybe you're actually generating those unwholesome thoughts on an enlightened being. Can you imagine the extent of the bad karma of you unenlightened thinking thoughts, like negative thoughts of someone who's enlightened? If you Google Ajahn Mahabua on YouTube, I caught myself once. Like I saw this video where he speaks in a very like strong way. Ajahn Mahabua, for those who don't know, is a reputed, very esteemed, enlightened monk who passed away a few decades ago in Thailand.
Just a few years ago.
Just a few years ago?
Recent.
Yeah. Anyway, the first thought that came to my critical mind a few years ago was like, it's clearly not enlightened. And then I caught myself and I was like, what are you doing? You don't even know what an enlightened being. What is an enlightened being? And I thought about it. Actually, it was actually a very good, interesting questioning. I was like, oh, maybe an enlightened being speaks like this. It has like very like nice posture. Perhaps sounds a little bit like Queen Elizabeth. Like where are we getting these cues? And because he didn't conform to what my pre-existing idea of what proper, wherever we get these cues from, then I started generating unwholesome thoughts. So you see that from brothers and sisters that are born Buddhists, I always learn a lot from lay people. I always learn so much, so precious, because you see that actually they're trained. Our friend May, she's trained never to have any bad thoughts on monastics. Precisely because of that. You already have generated so much bad karma, you want to generate even more. So it's good. Now I know how to build that practice. So anyway, I think I went on a tangent.
No, actually it was not so.
It reminds me of a story from one of the suttas where there was a monk who was kind of ugly and lazy and never showed up to the work periods, and he would just eat his food and then go back to his kuti, and the other monks were complaining like he never helps out with the work projects, he doesn't show up for the chanting, and he's ugly too. This guy's horrible. And then the Buddha heard about this, and he's like, you should not criticize that monk, you should not have bad thoughts about him. It's hard to find any spiritual attainment which he has not already mastered. In other words, the Buddha is saying this person is fully enlightened, and you're criticizing him just because he's ugly and he would rather meditate than work. It's like these are not good reasons to criticize someone.
Yeah.
You know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah. And younger monks used to, because he was short, and they used to go and stroke his head, and laugh at him and pull his nose or whatever. So then that was the time when Buddha said that.
Is that the
He-
dwarf monk?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the
yes.
one.
I've heard a couple stories of it.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Was
I
he
know it. I just can't remember it right now.
It
Mm,
wasn't Chulapantika.
Bakula? Was it?
No, it wasn't Bakula.
Mhm.
A name like that, I can't remember now.
He's only mentioned in a couple places. Anyway,
Yeah,
doesn't
there is
matter.
a special sutta about him.
It's not Bakula. It's not Chulapantika.
But also actually Shantideva, completely not in the suttas, but I don't know if he was ugly, but like he was actually, all his spiritual companions were like, he's lazy, he's this, he's that. And actually he was an incredibly developed being. So most of the time it's our defilements of mind.
Nagarjuna too, right? They used to criticize him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shantideva, they called him the master of eating and sleeping because that was all they thought he did. But he wound up producing some of the most seminal works of Mahayana philosophy in Buddhist history.
Mm-hmm. And Gita is changing the subject altogether. What is your tattoo on your shoulder, Bhante Sanatha Vihari?
Which one? There's a couple. There's like Air Force tattoo, the newer one, because they changed their sign like about 15 years ago. There's a bunch of clouds and lightning because most of the symbols in the Air Force for your job have like lightning and clouds and like a falcon. And then I have a Japanese tattoo that I never finished. I just left it that way. And I have a couple more in the back. And yeah, it's basically, well, I have more tattoos, but those are the ones you asked about.
The pity of it is that you can't get rid of it, no? Once you get it.
You can now, but it's too much
Must be very
money,
painful.
too expensive.
Besides, everyone has tattoos these days.
I don't. I'm very
Yeah,
unique
these
from my
days-
generation.
These days, it's weird to not have tattoos. 50 years ago, it was weird to have a tattoo. Now it's weird to not have a tattoo.
Yeah, I always like to be different, so I decided not to. And Amir asks, does having strong feelings of anger and jealousy of other people mean one was or will be in an asura realm? What is the best antidote for such feelings? Ayasulina?
Can you please read it again?
Does having strong feelings of anger and jealousy towards other people mean that one was in the past or will be in the future in an asura realm?
Now having such feelings, right? And associating it with the past or the future, right?
Yes.
So that is possible because when you think of asava, you find that they are the asavas can bring about anger, jealousy, envy, and also even good things also. But mostly it is the negative kind that comes up when you think of the underlying tendencies. And these are people who have been practicing these kind of qualities right through not only one life but for many lives, so that it's very difficult for them to not get into it even today, when in the present moment, when they might be learning that it is something not good, something that you have to let go of, something that you should not practice, but still those tendencies that they have been practicing right through so many lives come up, and it's very difficult for them to not feel like that, not have envy, not have anger when a situation arises. It needs a lot of practice, a lot of patience, and also the teachings. If they meet good teachers, they could sort of get guidance from them. Otherwise, or even from books if they read. But such people normally don't ask for guidance, don't go to teachers, don't read books that that say something against what they think.
Thank you, Ayam. And Naval says, is it true that the four sights, that is old man, sick man, corpse, and a monk, were what made the Buddha leave the palace and become an ascetic? Any sutta which mentions this? Actually, Aya, can you?
I
answer
can't
this?
remember a sutta that mentions it. Do you, Bante?
There is a sutta, but I don't remember which
Yeah,
one off the top of my
that's the
head.
thing. But at the same time, it's not in the Dhammachakra. No, no.
No, it's not.
No.
It's in one of the suttas, but I don't remember which one.
I don't remember either.
But it is the
you
normal.
No. It's all right. I think it's okay.
Yeah, we can move on. There's more
Yeah.
questions.
And Pia sends appreciation and gratitude. Oh, good. Thank you. We are also very appreciative of all your questions. Always good questions that you have. And Kian asks, please explain about steps on how to do meditation. Bante Sudaso?
Well, that's a very broad question. Ultimately, it depends on what you want to do with your meditation practice. But usually, if you're just beginning and you really don't have any clue how to start or what to do, I recommend looking up basic instructions for mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of breathing, and loving kindness meditation. So those are 3 meditation techniques which work pretty well for most people. And start practicing. You'll find many different instructions online for how to use these techniques. So each time you sit down to meditate, try out a different instruction that you found online. And eventually, as you try out several different approaches to these 3 meditation practices, you'll start to figure out which approach works well for you, which ones you like using and which ones work for your mind. And I recommend practicing for 10 minutes a day when you're first starting out. If 10 minutes seems like a ridiculously long time, then you could start with 5 minutes. But I mean, that's realistic. You can do 10 minutes. So sit down, set a timer to go off in 10 minutes, and don't get up until the timer goes off. And spend that time trying to do whatever meditation technique you've decided to try using. Just keep practicing. And as you get more experience, then you'll start to have more specific and refined questions about your meditation. And then you can bring those to some monks and ask them for advice. That's a way to start.
Okay, thank you, Bante. And it's Badia, the dwarf monk.
Badia?
Yes.
Okay.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Good to see you, Aya Brahmavara. Welcome. And, well, we have a comment or a question in written in Cambodian, which I cannot read at all. So, Venerable Rani, I don't know if you're venerable. If you can write it in English, then we can address it. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. I don't think anyone here speaks Cambodian. And Dave says, does the Theravada tradition have a practice of giving and receiving Tonglen like the Tibetan tradition? I don't think so. Personally, I've never encountered anything quite like Tonglen, but Tonglen is, it's a specific Tibetan practice that is so grounded. I mean, all the roots of it fundamentally are to be found in the Pali Canon. So it's just a slightly different approach to developing metta meditation, to develop compassion. I would say that's what comes to mind. So it's not exactly verbatim the words of the Buddha, the instructions of the Buddha, But actually, I think that was what Bhante Sudazo was somewhat hinting at when we were talking about altering the tradition. So it's not necessarily altering it, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not usually how it happens these days, like that someone goes on a meditation retreat and then they're like, oh yeah, wait, let me I actually know much better, than all those people who have been practicing for 2,500 years, but rather, the teachings enter into a culture and enlightened beings start manifesting within that culture, and different practices that are rooted in Dhamma start emerging that are particular, specific to perhaps the conditions of like what is helpful, the most helpful for that person to attain levels of awakening, which is why it's not a one size fits all. For example, if the Mahasi method was the only thing that one needed to attain awakening, then the Buddha would have taught the Mahasi method. But instead, the Buddha gave so many different teachings because each one of us has different karmic conditions. So you can be very fortunate, very lucky. You go to a Mahasi retreat and you're like, oh, this is exactly, what I needed. But that, for example, wasn't my particular, I wished. I went there and actually I saw that my mindfulness would increase, but also my aversion. And you really don't want to see me after Mahasi method. Bhante has seen me. So clearly I don't have the right conditions there. But for Mahasi Sayadaw, that was the practice that really helped him out. And that's what he shared. And it has benefited many. So in the same way, you see that in each Buddhist culture, but it's not that Buddhism arrived the day before yesterday and then Mahasi appears. Like it is a Buddhist country. There are different, there's a tradition, right? And then different practices come up. So I would say that Theravada tradition doesn't have it, but it's definitely complementary. So I know actually a lot of monastics who identify as Theravada monastics who do practice Tonglen, and it's completely compatible and useful. If any other of the venerables have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one way of practicing the Brahma Viharas. So it's perfectly compatible with Theravada.
Yeah. And Pial asks, is dukkha more of the result of clinging to five aggregates rather than inherent quality of the impermanence of the aggregates?
Yes. Yes.
Great. All right, you got it, Pial. You got the Ayasudina approval. And Mary asks, what is the Buddhist view of forgiveness? Is it easier to forgive as a Buddhist than in other religions?
Forgiveness. The only thing I can think of about forgiveness is kind of like when the monks get together and the nuns, when they get together, and we kind of like, confess, do like our confession, and then the mother monk goes, oh, like it's good that you acknowledge that you did these things and let it be for your future restraint. But I think forgiveness, like in the way that we usually think about it, like someone kind of like giving you permission or something, like, or they're the authority, and then they're like, well, now you're okay in my book because you asked for forgiveness. I don't really like see that as a useful thing. And I don't think I have even a forgiveness practice. I kind of just see everyone as delusional, and they're just like, living their lives, and they make mistakes. And I'm like, well, they're just ignorant beings like I am, and we're all just in this thing together, and we're just going to act and do foolish things. So it's more kind of like I empathize with them.
That is a forgiveness practice. Oh. That means you automatically forgive everyone. So that is a forgiveness practice. And that's a really beautiful forgiveness practice.
Sadhu. Great. And Marlai actually translated. Good to see you, Marlai, first of all. And thanks for translating the Cambodian question. So it says, why today there are still monks who venerate according to the law? As far as I know, until there are enough monks and nuns to ordain the Buddha for 500 years, all the nuns. Wait, that was the Google Translate, but then we have her own translation. in Khmer. How come there are bhikkhunis in modern times? How they being ordained in accordance to the Buddha's teaching? I've heard that they died out 500 years after the passing of the Buddha. Well, there are interesting stories in each Buddhist country. It's called mythology. So each Buddhist country will have a different idea. Some that it died right after the Buddha, some that it was never even like appeared, that actually was a later invention. There's so many like interesting theories, but in reality, actually, the Bhikkhuni order never died out. The Buddha did not ordain Theravada Bhikkhuni, Mahayana Bhikkhuni, Vajrayana Bhikkhuni. He just ordained Bhikkhuni, and he ordained bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, right? He ordained the Sangha. And so actually that's the only lineage of any, like in the world, that has been, how do you say, not stopped, uninterrupted since the beginning, since the Buddha. And of course, all of us everywhere in the world have greed, hatred, and delusion, as we were saying earlier. So then we start thinking, well, there's actually this type of bhikkhuni and this type of bhikkhu and here and there. But actually, if you see even the history of the bhikkhu order, if I remember correctly, it was from Sri Lanka that it went to Taiwan, right? Or something like that. Yeah. So also the bhikkhuni order, for example, one was brought from Sri Lanka to Taiwan, and then
from Sri Lanka to China.
To China. Okay, great. Actually, I'll pass it on to Ayasudina, who is my senior.
And there was a lot of lot of research done about this before the ordination started, and that research was done by not ordinary uneducated people, but by professors and so on. So they found that the lineage that had gone from Sri Lanka to China remained, and even today it is there. So therefore, we could resurrect what had disappeared, and that is how it was done. And also another thing is that there is this talk about the bhikkhus cannot ordain bhikkhunis, but the Buddha himself told the bhikkhus. Now Mahapajapati was given the ordination by the Buddha, and then the Buddha said, now bhikkhus, you ordain the others. So, and that that declaration has not been I'm sorry, has not been deleted or cut off, or later on certain things were changed by the Buddha. Now Buddha gave certain orders or whatever, and then later he said, now from today on this is not going to work, this I'm going to stop this. But this particular one was never stopped. So therefore there are certain monks who are more erudite, or I don't know what to put the word that I should use, who think that can be taken even today, and therefore monks can ordain nuns and bhikkhunis, but there are others who are against it. So it all depends on the attitude that they have towards women. Because women, after all, when you take the whole world, form more than half the population. So are you going to cut off all of them? Are they? If there were no women, there wouldn't be men too.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Great. Yes, thank you, Aya. And also we want more people practicing the Dhamma, not less, as connected to what we were saying earlier, in terms of people who have perhaps unwholesome states of mind, which I'm not equating to women having unwholesome states of mind. I want to clarify that. But rather, like anyone, doesn't matter where they're coming from, what type of body they have, etc. Every single person should be encouraged to practice whatever, however many precepts they feel comfortable practicing. But if they want to practice with more precepts, it should be encouraged. More restraint? Yes, go for it, please. More renunciation? Yes. Not encourage people to do the opposite. It's bizarre, right? So I would say that when there, the mythology that is very inconsistent also within different, you can hear so many different stories of when the Bhikkhuni order died out or didn't die out, etc. There's a lot of contradicting information. That's fundamentally because actually the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, are ahead of not only that time, this time. The Buddha was so avant-garde because he's an enlightened being. So in a place where like women have, for the past 3,000 years, have been put in a certain and particular position in society, and a lot of people across the world were kind of agreeing, we're all on the same page. The teachings of the Buddha are incredibly inconvenient. They're inconvenient for everything. They're also inconvenient, forget about women, but they're inconvenient for capitalism, like the capitalist world that we live here today. It's the opposite of consumerism. Incredibly inconvenient religion. So that's when we get into politics rather than into practice, rather than in the Dhamma. But Buddha was completely uninterested in that. So he was interested in the potential and giving opportunity for anyone who had little dust in their eyes to practice. Not going, oh, these people are supposed to be doing that and these other people are supposed to be doing that. That's not for the sake of awakening. So yeah, you see that then when you actually start studying, then it has nothing to do with the mythology or the hearsay that we hear. But actually, for example, bhikkhunis were in Thailand last century. They existed. So yeah, the history, the reality of things is a little bit different. And there are historical reasons for which then orders are erased. For more information, you can Google Ayatataloka Thai Bhikkhunis, and you can find a really interesting paper, for example, on that subject matter. All right, and it's 8:57. So the M asks, why do I see bhikkhus so often during Dhamma talks keeping their eyes open or looking at the ground? You can't meditate with so much noise in the room, can you? Thank you. You are great. Maybe Dr. Vihari wants to answer that.
Like during meditation, why do they see?
I think during Dhamma talks, keeping their eyes open or looking at the ground.
Oh, well, I just look at the ground because it's easier for me to listen. And I keep my eyes closed because it's easier for me to listen, so I don't get distracted by like the other things that are going on. But usually, like when I do go to like events, most of the monks have their eyes closed or they're looking at the ground. And I think that's just like, to be modest. There's some like also Vinaya rules, kind of like if we look at when you go on alms, how you have to like kind of look down and not look the person in the face when you get the food. And so I think that's a good practice to do. Like even when you watch us here, like if we can, kind of, if you see the monks looking away or have their eyes closed, don't think because they're uninterested and they don't care about what people are saying online. But we're just kind of, we're doing our monks thing and nuns thing.
Great, thank you. And the last comment/question is from Geeta, who says, I saw in this Bhikkhuni 2 strands of thought was there after the Buddha's passing. For example, Mahakassapa and Ananda, what Venerable Vimalanyani Bhikkhuni was sharing the other day. So that Venerable Vimalanyani is doing a historical sort of perspective on the suttas, and so not necessarily. So we can get to the Kalama Sutta. One should not believe in something just because it's written in the book. or because it's passed on, through oral tradition, or because Bhaktivedanta Vihari comes and tells me, or or because I want to believe it, or I want it to, that's how things are convenient to me. There's so many different reasons why we believe the things that we believe. But my personal faith in the Dhamma is actually because it's something experienceable.
Experienceable. Yeah, I think that's a real word.
And also extremely consistent. I was not able to prove the Buddha wrong. Everything falls in neatly. So it's unconceivable for me to think that an enlightened being like Mahakassapa could be misogynist. It's against the Bhikkhuni order. It makes no sense. Against the teachings of his teacher. I could care less that there is a sutta where there's a paragraph where they attribute, it's actually not even a sutta, but it's it's not a sutta. So there are certain segments, but I feel like people, when are talking about these topics, they focus on on one sentence or 1% of the Pali Canon, when the rest of the 99% of the Pali Canon says the opposite. So, if the Buddha is reported, for example, to say, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, the sky is blue, and then there is a sutta where it's been reported that the Buddha said the sky is yellow, then all of a sudden we believe that the sky is yellow? Or do we want to see that there is some consistency? Do we want to actually understand for ourselves? See, how could this be? What would be the implication at large for it to be that way? Well, if Mahakassapa was a misogynist or against the Bhikkhuni order and against the decisions of the Buddha, an enlightened being, it would be a little in contradiction, I think, with with what are we doing here?
How did that idea come about Mahakassapa?
Because apparently, after the first council, or at the first council, so it's attributed to Mahakassapa questioning Ananda, and Ananda being on the side of the Bhikkhunis, and Mahakassapa, in theory, is supposed to actually, how do you say?
But you cannot sort of judge things by just one sentence or one incident, because there are many other things that that don't say that Kassapa was sort of against women. It is true that he and Bhadda Kapilani never consumed, never lived together as husband and wife, though they were actually married. That doesn't mean that, and there are certain other instances when he was talking about the frailty of women or whatever, but it doesn't mean that he was a bad man or that he was against the Bhikkhunis. I don't think so. But lots of people think that Mahakassapa was against and that Ananda was the one who was favoring the women.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aya. Yeah, there's, just once again, does it make sense? Is that consistent with how enlightened beings behave throughout the suttas? It doesn't seem consistent to me. So I have my doubts that is actually a historical account. So, usually when I, I have lots of Dhammasukha whenever I have the teachings of the Buddha. Whenever there is something that is a little bit off, it's easily recognizable, right? You just have a sense that it's a little bit off. How is it possible? The Buddha never contradicts himself. Arhats never contradict themselves. It would make no sense. So yeah, let's take it with the big grain of salt, I would say, with a big stone. And Gita says, it doesn't matter, I will all awaken to the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Yes. So on that note, I think we can all agree on that. And we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.